Hello everyone. Today we're about to begin a touching and vibrant story, one that follows Ron, a quiet Apache man carrying the weight of his past, and Hannah, a strong-willed white widow running from the shadows of her own life. When fate traps them deep in the wild mountains, their struggle to survive slowly turns into a journey of healing, where pain, trust, and laughter gently rekindle the fire of love. A flowing stream, a mischievous coyote, and a heart once thought to be made of stone, all weave together into a romance that in the Wild West, fierce yet tender, as raw and beautiful as the land itself. So, before we begin this journey, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel, but only if you truly enjoy what I share. And don't forget to let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is where you are right now. It's always wonderful to know that across this wide world, we can still gather together around a small campfire of stories. And now, let's begin. The sun had barely cleared the rim of Canyon Verde when Ron Nachi tightened the cinch on his paint gelding and let out a quiet breath that turned to mist in the chill. The canyon air was thin that morning, scented with juniper and dust. Somewhere far off, a coyote barked once more, a greeting then a warning. Ron answered with a low hum, the fragment of an old Apache tune he had turned into a rhythm on his wooden drum. He lived alone in these hills, a half-forgotten man who had once beaten the U.S. Army's marching calls and now listened only to the wind. The army had paid him in rations and betrayal, and his own people had called him traitor. So, Ron had walked away from both flags and settled where the red cliffs met the pines, raising a few half-wild horses and carving small drums from cedar. The solitude fit him like worn leather rough, but shaped to his skin. That morning, he was checking the upper meadow for a missing mare when a single rifle shot cracked through the canyon. Then another, sharper, closer. His horse tossed its head. Ron froze, tilting his head like a man who could hear more than sound. Beneath the echo, he caught something else, a woman's voice, faint and desperate, swallowed by the ravine. He spurred his gelding toward it, ducking branches as the path narrowed. At a bend in the dry wash, he saw her. A woman in a torn riding skirt, hair loose, crouched behind a fallen log with a revolver in her hand. Across the wash, 3 riders were closing in, their dust rising like ghosts in the morning light. Ron didn't think. He swung down, slapped his horse's flank, and fired a warning shot into the canyon wall. The echo boomed like thunder. Startled, the riders jerked their reins, mistaking the sound for a posse ahead. The woman looked up, her blue eyes wide with disbelief as Ron motioned sharply this way. She hesitated. He pointed to the narrow deer trail leading into the pines. Another bullet hissed over the log, splintering bark inches from her shoulder. That decided her. She ran, half stumbling, clutching her skirts, and followed him into the trees. They climbed hard for nearly a mile until the gunfire faded behind them. When she could no longer breathe for the climb, Ron halted beside a small creek and listened. Nothing but wind and water. Life for now. The woman bent double, hands on her knees, and tried to speak. Who are you? Name is Ron. His voice was low, You can sit. The ground don't bite. She sank onto a rock, chest heaving. They were going to kill me. He nodded. Look that way. Why? Why did you help me? Ron shrugged. Guess I was born. That turned him a sharp glare. Beneath the dirt and fear, she was handsome in a strong-boned way, maybe 30 or so. She wore a man's coat that hung too loose and a silver locket that caught the light each time she moved. He had it under control, she said defensively. You were hiding behind a dead log, he replied. Good strategy if you were the log. Her mouth opened, then closed again. He turned to the creek, filled his canteen, and offered it to her. She hesitated, then drank. When she handed it back, she asked, Where are you taking me? Someplace they won't find us. I can take care of myself. Sure, he said mildly, mounting up. Do you want to start by walking or arguing? She glared again, but she took his offered hand and let him pull her up behind him. They rode in silence through the thickening pines. The scent of sap sharpened the air. By afternoon, the sky darkened. Clouds rolled over the canyon rim like black wool. Ron led her to his cabin, a low shelter built of pine logs tucked between 2 cliffs. Smoke from the small chimney curled upward, thin and blue. This is your home, she asked, slipping from the saddle. Only place that lets me stay without questions. Inside, the cabin was plain, a cot, a stone hearth, a few tools, a pair of drums of different sizes stacked in the corner. The air smelled of coffee and horsehide. She looked around, wary but curious. "EAJ start a fire," Ron said. "I can do it." She knelt beside the hearth, fumbling with flint and steel. Sparks flew, then died. After the third try, Ron crouched beside her side and touched her hand lightly. "Too much air," he murmured. "Let the smoke build first." She shot him a look, but followed his guidance. The flame caught, licking the dry pine. She sat back, triumphant. "There," she said. "Told you I could manage." Ron smiled faintly. "Yes, ma'am. Took only 3 tries and 1 Apache." She blinked. "You are Apache?" He didn't answer directly. Alf the army thought so. Silence filled the cabin. Rain began drumming on the roof, soft at first, then harder, steady as a heartbeat. She drew closer to the fire, warming her hands. "My name's Hannah," she said at last. "Hannah Reeves. Those men were supposed to buy horses from me. Instead, they tried to steal them and the deed to my ranch." Ron poured coffee into 2 tin cups. "You got friends in town? Not the kind who'd ride out for me." She glanced toward him. "Do you?" He laughed quietly, a sound like gravel rolling in water. "He used to. Then I learned friends are like whiskey, good till the bottle's empty." That turned the first faint smile from her since the gunfire. "That's a sad way to live." "It's a clean way," he said. Thunder rumbled over the ridge. The rain thickened, turning the clearing into a blur. They would be stuck there till morning, maybe longer. Hannah rose, restless, pacing the small cabin. "You could have left me down there," she said finally. "He could have," Ron agreed. "Why didn't you?" "I considered that. Didn't they seem right, and the wolves already had breakfast?" She stared at him, trying to decide if he was joking. "You have a strange sense of humor, Mr. Nache. That's why I keep it to myself." Outside, lightning flashed. Inside, the fire glowed on their faces, hers pale, his copper brown, both marked by weariness and something unspoken. Ron reached for one of his small drums and set it between them. With the heel of his hand, he tapped a rhythm, slow, steady, almost like breathing. "What's that for?" she asked. "To remind me the world's still turning." After a while, she said quietly, "It sounds like a heartbeat." He looked up, the corners of his mouth lifting. "Maybe it is." The rain went on through the night, washing the canyon clean. And inside that small cabin, the man who wouldn't belong and the woman who had nowhere left to go listened to the same rhythm, the soft pulse of a world wide enough for both of them. Morning came wrapped in fog. The rain had stopped sometime before dawn, but the forest still dripped and whispered like a living thing catching its breath. Smoke from Ron's chimney rose straight up through the gray light. Hannah woke to the scent of coffee and wood smoke. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then she saw the low rafters, the rough log walls, and the man sitting cross-legged near the fire, whittling something with slow, patient strokes. He looked up as she stirred. "You is naughty," he said mildly. "Her eyes narrowed. "I do not." "Then maybe the raccoons were singing last night." She sat up brushing her hair from her face. "You have an odd sense of humor, Mr. Nahe. Helps pass the time when the company's bad." She muttered something unladylike and reached for her boots, which were dry now, sat neatly by the hearth. He had cleaned the mud from them. She noticed the care in that small act and hated that it softened her mood. The storm had left the clearing slick and shining. Through the cabin door, she could see the horses grazing near the tree line. Her mare and his paint gelding side by side like uneasy allies. "Where are we?" she asked, pulling on her coat. "Alpha day's ride from Bear the Bluff." "Maybe less if you're not bleeding." "He wasn't bleeding yesterday." He raised an eyebrow. "You fell off a ledge." "He jumped off a ledge," she corrected. "On purpose." He nodded as though the distinction amused him. Then it was a graceful fall. She sighed exasperated. What do you plan to do with me now that I'm your unwilling guest? Feed you. He said simply, turning the fish over the coals. Then figure what those men want and whether they'll come looking. The smell of roasting trout made her stomach betray her with a growl. He didn't comment, only handed her a tin plate. They ate in companionable silence, the only sounds the hiss of the fire and the murmur of dripping pans. After a while, she said, Do you live out here alone? Mostly. Why? He wiped his hands on a rag. Because I can. That's not an answer. He gave her a sidelong look. Neither was your question. You didn't ask why I stay. You asked why I'm alone. That's different. She frowned, half intrigued, half annoyed by his riddling way of speaking. All right, then. Why are you alone? He smiled faintly. Because folks talk too much and shoot too easy. She couldn't argue with that, not after the last 24 hours. By midday, the clouds began to break. Shafts of sunlight spilled through the tall pines, catching on wet needles like bits of glass. Ron set about mending a broken bridle strap while Hannah wandered the clearing, restless. You have tools for everything, she said, watching him work. Except maybe conversation. He used to have one for that, though. He said without looking up. Lost it in a poker game. She laughed before she could stop herself. The sound startled them both. Well, she said after a moment, since you're playing host, maybe you could teach me something useful. I can't just sit here doing nothing. He glanced up, studying her face as if measuring how serious she was. Then he handed her the knife. You can start by cutting strips from that deer hide, not toward your fingers. She took it, crouched beside him, and began slicing carefully. Like this? Closer, he said. He moved behind her, guiding her hand with his own, steady and warm. The contact was brief, but enough to send a quick jolt through her chest. She cleared her throat. eBay skinned rabbits before, you know. He figured. But rabbits don't fight back much. They worked together a while in silence. When she finished, he nodded. Not bad. Jube got steady hands. He had to, she said. Running a ranch alone doesn't allow for shaking. He looked at her with something like respect. Your husband left it to you? He left me the debts, she said dryly. The ranch I built back from ruin myself. He didn't press further, and she was grateful. That afternoon they walked down to the creek to refill water skins. The air smelled of wet earth and pine resin. Ron moved quietly, almost soundless on the forest floor. Hannah tried to match his step, but every dry twig seemed determined to betray her. Do you always sneak around like a ghost? She whispered. Ghosts don't trip on roots, he said. She shot him a look, but he was smiling now, an expression that softened his features, made him almost boyish. They reached the creek, and he showed her how to look for animal tracks in the mud. Deer, raccoon, once a mountain lion's faint pad marks. She listened, half fascinated, half cautious. When he pointed out how a raccoon's print looked like a child's hand, she laughed again, forgetting her fear. You make it sound like the forest talks to you, she said. It does. He replied simply, you just forgot the language. For a moment, she thought he was teasing. Then she saw the quiet sincerity in his eyes and didn't know what to say. They filled the canteens and headed back. Halfway to the cabin, a low rumble shook the air, distant thunder or perhaps a landslide far off. Ron stopped listening. Nothing close, he said finally. But we stay near the ridge tonight. Safer ground. From what? From whoever's still looking. Her heart tightened. Do you think they'll come here? You think men like Burke don't like being made fools of? He looked at her then. If they find the ranch empty, they'll come this way. That's what I'd do. She shivered, though the sun was warm. He hate feeling helpless. Ron handed her a small pistol from his belt. Then don't be. She stared at it. He can shoot, but this is your gun. He got another. He patted the rifle slung on his shoulder. Besides, you'll sleep better holding that. Then she blinked, caught between shock and a laugh. You are impossible. It grinned. Not impossible. Just inconvenient. By dusk, the forest turned gold and deep green. They sat by the fire again, eating what he called hunter stew, rabbit, beans, and wild onions. Hannah asked, "Do you ever get lonely out here?" I stirred the pot. "So many times. Then I remember what company's like." "Meaning women?" "Meaning people." She smiled over her tin cup. "You're a hard man to read, Ron Neji." "That's the point," he said softly. She studied him then, really studied him. The calm strength in his posture, the tiny scar across his jaw, the eyes that seemed older than his face. He wasn't what she had expected an Apache to be. It wasn't what she had expected any man to be. When she looked away, she found herself smiling. He noticed, but said nothing. As the fire burned low, he pulled a small pouch from his coat and scattered something into the flames. A faint sweet smoke rose, perfumed and strange. "What's that?" she asked. "Cedar and sage," he said. "Keeps the night clean." Superstition? Memory. The scent filled the air, mingling with the pine. She felt drowsy, safe, though she told herself she shouldn't. Outside the forest rustled and hummed. Unseen life inside settled between them again, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the quiet that comes after two people stop being strangers. When she finally lay down on the cot, she heard him step outside. The steady beat of his drum drifted through the doorway, slow, rhythmic, matching the pulse of her own heart. It wasn't a soldier's cadence this time. It was softer, older, like the voice of the canyon itself. And before she knew it, Hannah Reeves, the woman who never trusted anyone, fell asleep smiling. The next morning dawned clean and gold, the kind of morning that made the air taste like new beginnings. Mist drifted low over the creek, and sunlight slipped through the pines in thin ribbons. The storm had scrubbed the world spotless. Hannah woke first. Ron was gone. Only his hat hung on a peg, and the faint smell of coffee lingered in the air. Outside the horses grazed near the creek, tails flicking lazily. For once, the silence felt almost peaceful. She decided to make use of it. Her clothes were stiff with mud and smoke. Her hair felt like it had been through a battlefield. Down by the creek, the water shone like polished glass, cold but inviting. She checked the trees, no sign of Ron. Then smiled to herself. "Well, Mrs. Reeves," she murmured, "time to act civilized again." She left her clothes folded neatly on a flat rock and waded in. The water bit like ice, but it was a clean kind of pain, chasing away the exhaustion of the past days. She ducked under, gasped, and laughed. Somewhere behind her, a twig cracked. She froze, peering through wet hair. Nothing. Only a few blue jays scolding from the branches. She relaxed, swam a little further out, and didn't notice the pair of yellow eyes watching from the underbrush. The coyote was young, hungry, and far too curious for its own good. It crept forward, sniffing the strange-smelling pile of cloth and leather. One paw, then another. Its teeth caught a corner of the coat, and with a quick jerk, it was gone, dragging half her wardrobe into the brush. When Hannah turned and saw the empty rock, she let out a sound that startled every bird within half a mile. "Ron." Her voice echoed through the trees, followed by a string of words that would have made her late husband proud. Up near the cabin, Ron was crouched by the fire, tending a skillet of beans. He looked up at her voice, half alarmed, half amused. "You all right down there?" "No." She shouted. "Absolutely not." He set the pan aside, grabbed his rifle, and jogged down the slope. "You hurt?" "Worse." She yelled, crouching waist deep in the water, her face redder than sunset. "Something stole my clothes." I stopped dead on the bank, blinking. "Something?" "A coyote oro, for heaven's sake, stop grinning." Ron rubbed a hand over his mouth, trying not to laugh. "Can't help it, never heard of a coyote with fashion sense." "Ron hey, I swear if you don't find them all right, all right." I slung the rifle over his shoulder. "Stay put." Don't scare the fish. She groaned, covering her face. This is mortifying. I headed toward the brush, still chuckling. Not to me. I've seen stranger things. Once saw a preacher lose his trousers to a mule in front of 50 people. Man kept right on sermonizing. That's not helping. Just saying you're in good company. It disappeared into the trees, following the trail of small paw prints. The coyote hadn't gone far. It was tugging happily at a sleeve, convinced it had caught something edible. Ron crouched low, murmured a few words in Apache, and tossed a bit of dried meat its way. The animal dropped the fabric, and slunk off, tail twitching. When he came back, scratches lined his forearms, and a few cactus needles clung to his shirt. Hannah was still in the water, glaring. You took your time, she said. At the bargain with a thief. I held up the muddy bundle. It fought hard. The coyote, not me. She reached for the clothes, then realized the problem. Could you turn around? I raised an eyebrow. Afraid I'll steal them next. Ron. I grinned, turned his back, and whistled tunelessly while she scrambled out of the water. A few minutes later, she appeared behind him, wrapped in her damp clothes and what dignity she could salvage. Her cheeks still flushed, but her eyes were bright with something between outrage and reluctant amusement. I suppose you think this is funny, she said. I suppose it's the funniest thing that's happened to me all year. She folded her arms. You're enjoying my humiliation. Not humiliation. Character building. Keep talking, and I'll build your character with a rock. That made him laugh, really laugh, the kind that came from deep in his chest. It startled her. She hadn't realized how good his laughter sounded, warm and unguarded. She tried not to smile, but failed. Fine, she said, giving in you win. I never leave my clothes unattended again. I pretended to think it over. Good plan. Though I can't promise the coyotes won't start a fashion trend. Ron. All right. I lifted both hands in surrender, still grinning. No more teasing, honest. Somehow I doubt that. Later, as the sun climbed higher, she found him sitting on a fallen log, carving a small shape from bone. I glanced up when she approached. What are you making? Something for you. She blinked. For me? Why? Because the coyote embarrassed you. It owes you an apology, and I work cheap. He held out a tiny pendant, a coyote head, finely detailed, strung on a bit of leather cord. She turned it over in her hand, touched by the unexpected thoughtfulness. It's beautiful, she said softly. Did you really carve this just now? I started it yesterday, he said, eyes twinkling. You just gave me a reason to finish. She slipped it over her neck. The cool bone rested against her skin. Thank you. I nodded, serious now. Every story needs a fool. Today, that was the coyote. Tomorrow, maybe me. She laughed again. Somehow, I think you've had practice. He tilted his head. What makes you say that? You're too good at pretending not to care. He looked away, the smile fading a little. Pretending's easy. Believing's harder. She studied him, wanting to ask what he meant, but sensing it wasn't time. The wind moved through the trees, whispering like water over stones. That evening, after supper, they sat by the fire while the horses dozed nearby. Hannah turned the small pendant in her fingers, catching the firelight on its smooth edges. You know, she said, I almost forgot what it felt like to laugh at something that didn't hurt. Ron stirred the embers with a stick. Then I did my job. Is that what this is, your job? Rescuing lost widows and fighting coyotes for their laundry? Only on Wednesdays. She chuckled, shaking her head. You're impossible. Still just inconvenient. A quiet settled between them, not awkward now, but comfortable, like a soft blanket shared on a cold night. She found herself watching the lines of his face in the firelight, the way his eyes caught the glow, warm and steady. Ron, she said after a while, why did you really help me that day? You could have let them take me. He didn't answer right away. Finally, he said, because nobody helped the ones I loved when the soldiers came. Mabia was trying to even the count. The honesty in his voice struck her deeper than she expected. She reached out, touched his arm gently. Then thank you. For evening the count. He looked at her hand, then at her. You're welcome, Hannah Reeves. The fire cracked softly. Somewhere out in the dark, a coyote yipped, high and distant, like laughter carried on the wind. Hannah smiled. Your friend's back. Ron's mouth curved. It's just checking if you locked up your wardrobe. She rolled her eyes, but the smile stayed. When she finally lay down for the night, she could still hear him humming by the dying fire, a tune half Apache, half something else. The rhythm matched the beat of her heart. For the first time in years, she didn't dream of loss or fear. She dreamed of water and laughter, and a man's quiet voice saying, maybe it is a heartbeat. By the time the sun slid behind the pines, the canyon had turned the color of burnt gold. The air smelled of pitch and cool stone. Ron built a small fire near the mouth of the clearing, and Hannah gathered wood, pretending not to watch him. He moved with the easy grace of a man born to silence, every motion deliberate, economical. She still wore the carved coyote pendant around her neck, though she told herself it was just for luck. When she came back with the last armful of branches, he said, "You work like someone who's never had help." She dropped the wood with a thud. That's because I haven't. Even before the ranch? Especially before. He didn't press. He poured water from the canteen into a small tin pot, adding beans and the bits of dried meat. The smell rose rich and savory. They ate side by side on a fallen log, the fire painting their faces in shifting gold and shadow. After a long silence, Hannah said, "You ever think about going back? To your people, I mean." Ron poked the coals with a stick. "They wouldn't have me, not anymore." "Why not?" "Because I stood on the wrong side of the river too long." She frowned. "I don't understand." He looked up, his eyes glinting with the firelight. "When the army came, they said I could keep my family safe if I scouted for them." He believed them. Then one night, while I was out leading a patrol, they raided a camp 2 valleys over. My wife and son were there. The quiet that followed was heavy enough to crush breath. Hannah's throat tightened. "Ron?" He shook his head. "It was a long time ago. Don't it matter now?" "It matters," she said softly. "It always does." He gave a small humorless smile. "You sound like a preacher." "Hardly. Eve buried too many good things to preach about hope." Ron studied her for a moment. "Your husband?" She nodded. Staring into the flames. "Killed in a skirmish with raiders 2 years ago. He was brave. People said I was lucky to have a soldier." He stopped feeling lucky after the 3rd letter of condolence. She took a slow breath. He wasn't a bad man, just hard. Everything was about order, rules, what people thought. When he died, I realized I'd been living someone else's life for years. Ron's gaze softened. "And now? Now I don't know whose life I'm living," she said with a shaky laugh. For a long moment, the only sound was the pop of the fire and the hiss of pine sap. Then he reached into his satchel and pulled out a small drum no bigger than a dinner plate, polished smooth as river stone. He held it out to her. "Try it." She blinked. He wouldn't know how. "Don't it matter?" He did once. She hesitated, then struck it lightly with her palm. The sound was low and round, echoing softly through the trees. "It sounds alive," she said. "It is," Ron replied. "Made from hide and cedar. One was once flesh, the other once root. Both still remember." She smiled faintly. "That's poetry." "No, that's survival." He leaned forward, took the drum, and played 3 short beats heartbeat rhythm. Slow and steady. Then he stopped it. "When I can't sleep, I play that. Reminds me the world keeps going whether I want it to or not." Hannah hugged her knees, watching the fire dance in his eyes. "You ever wish it didn't?" "Sometimes." He said. Then something small happens. A horse nickers or the sun comes through the trees just right and I think maybe the world's trying to start over. She smiled. You're a philosopher. Ron Nitch. Just a man who's made too many mistakes to quit learning from them. Later, as darkness deepened, he threw another log on the fire. The orange light flickered across the clearing, catching on the silver of her locket. What's in there? He asked. She looked down. Nothing anymore. Said to be a picture of my husband. He buried it with him. Then why keep the locket? A bit, I guess. She traced its edges thoughtfully. Or maybe proof that I once tried to love right. He nodded slowly. That's harder than shooting straight. She chuckled. That sounds like something you learned the hard way. I learned everything the hard way. He said, thinning faintly. The mood lightened a little. She told him about the early days at her ranch, breaking her first Mustang, getting thrown so hard she couldn't sit for a week, hiring a cowhand who ran off with her best saddle. Ron laughed quietly at that. You sound like someone who keeps trusting even when you shouldn't. He said. Maybe I'm just too stubborn not to. He gave her an approving look. That's a kind of courage. Stubbornness? No, starting over. She turned toward him. Is that what you've been doing out here all this time? Starting over? He poked the fire. Trying to. The land forgets slower than people do, but it forgives better. The fire snapped. A small ember landed on his sleeve. Hannah reached over, brushed it away without thinking. Her fingers lingered a heartbeat too long. Ron made her gasp. The moment stretched between them, warm and uncertain. She pulled her hand back quickly, looking away. Sorry. She murmured. For saving me from spontaneous combustion? I try to forgive you. He said smilingly. She laughed a soft reluctant laugh that turned into something deeper, something freer. When she finally looked at him again, she found him watching her. The faintest question in his eyes. For once, she didn't mind being seen. As the night wore on, the fire burned low. The forest settled into its nocturnal hum crickets, the distant hoot of an owl, the sigh of wind through pine needles. Hannah drew the blanket around her shoulders. Ron handed her a tin cup of hot coffee. She sipped, wincing at the bitterness. You brew this to drink or to strip paint? Depends who's drinking. He said. It wakes the dead or it kills the weak. She raised a brow. And which am I? Still deciding. She laughed, shaking her head. You're impossible. Still inconvenient. Their eyes met over the rim of her cup and the laughter softened into something quieter. You're not what I expected. She said. Neither are you. What did you expect? He thought for a moment. Someone who'd scream, cry, demand to go home. I nearly did. But you didn't. He said gently. You stayed. I didn't have a choice. Everybody has a choice, Hannah. You chose to live. That silenced her. She set the cup down, staring into the fire. You make it sound braver than it felt. Bravery's not about feeling. He said. It's about showing. She looked at him again, the light flickering between them. And for the first time she didn't see an outsider or a stranger, only a man who understood loss the way she did. He rose, went to the edge of the clearing, and looked out into the darkness. Tomorrow, we'll move north. He said. There's a ridge where we can see the trails below. If Burke's coming, we'll know. She nodded. And if he's not? Then maybe we stop running. He turned back toward her, silhouetted by firelight. The steady beat of his heart reflected in the slow flicker of flame. She smiled faintly. I could get used to that, not running. Careful. He said. You might start liking the company. I already do. She admitted quietly. Ron's expression softened. For a long moment, they stood in that quiet understanding. Two souls burned hollow by life, finding warmth in the same small fire. Then he said almost shyly, Good night, Hannah Reeves. She looked up, meeting his gaze. Good night, Ron Nitch. He turned away, crouched by the dying embers, and began to tap the drum slow, steady, the rhythm of endurance. Hannah listened from her blanket, eyes half closed, and realized she wasn't afraid of the dark anymore. For the first time in years, the night felt like a promise instead of a threat. The next morning came with the smell of smoke. Not the thin kind that rose from their fire, but the heavy bitter scent of something burning far off. Ron was already outside when Hannah stepped from the cabin, still tying her hair back. He stood on a ridge, scanning the valley through a pair of old field glasses. The light of his shoulders told her before his words did. "They're coming," he said. "How many?" 4, maybe 5. "They're riding fast, cutting through the south trail." "Burke. Burke." Ron said simply. Hannah felt the world tilt a little beneath her feet. For a moment, she couldn't speak. "Then we should run." Ron lowered the glasses. "No, Denny. They see the horses if we move now. We hold here." "Hold." She tried to steady her breath. "You mean fight?" He turned to her, calm as stone. "Only if they make me." He walked back to the cabin, checking his rifle and knife, moving with the quiet certainty of a man who'd done this before. Hannah followed him inside, her pulse drumming in her ears. "I'm not letting you face them alone," she said. He looked at her, really looked, and for a heartbeat, she saw the flash of fear behind his composure. Not for himself, but for her. "I'm not asking you to," he said gently. "You've got a good shot. Remember that. I haven't shot at a man before. Don't think of it as a man. Think of it as a shadow that forgot where the light is." She nodded, swallowing hard. He loaded the rifle, handed it to her, and then crouched near the hearth, where he'd hidden a small bundle of powder and a fuse line made from white cloth. "What's that?" "Insurance," he said. He set the fuse under the doorframe, leading it out toward the clearing, where the firewood pile sat drying from the last storm. Hannah understood if Burke's men rushed the cabin, they'd have more than bullets to deal with. Bamida, the first rider appeared between the trees, Burke himself. His long duster flapping behind him like a vulture's wing. The others fanned out, circling slow. "Reeves," he shouted, his voice echoing through the canyon. "You up there?" Ron motioned for her to stay silent. They crouched by the window, peering through the narrow gap between the logs. Burke rode closer, his face red from the climb. "You can't hide forever, Hannah. That Apache half-breed won't save you. You hear me? It's not even a man. It's a ghost wearing skin." Ron's jaw tightened, but he didn't move. Burke laughed. "Come on, sweetheart. You and I had business. Hand me the deed, and maybe I'll let you walk away." Hannah gripped the rifle, anger burning then fear. "He's lying," she whispered. "I know." The men dismounted, spreading out like wolves. Burke signaled one to circle behind. Ron caught the motion and whispered, front and back. "Stay low." A moment later came the sharp crack of a rifle. The bullet slammed into the cabin wall, sending splinters flying. Hannah backed. Ron returned fire, quick and measured. One of the riders cursed and fell. The gunfire lit the canyon like thunder. The horses screamed, bolting. Smoke filled the air, acrid and dense. Hannah crawled to reload, her hands shaking. "They'll burn us out." "Not if I do it first." It reached for the fuse line. "Run, wait." But it was too late. It struck a spark and tossed it onto the trail of powder. It hissed to life, slithering toward the woodpile. Burke saw the flame too late. The explosion wasn't large, but it was enough, a roar of fire and dust that sent the men scattering. Burke's horse reared, throwing him. Ron took the chance to move. He grabbed Hannah's arm. "Come on." They ran from the cabin as smoke poured out behind them, the hillside echoing with gunfire. Hannah stumbled once. Ron caught her, his arm warm around her waist. They ducked behind a fallen log as a bullet whined past. He fired back, quick and sure, hitting one of Burke's men in the leg. The others hesitated, uncertain in the smoke. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded, gasping. "You just grazed." He looked down at his shoulder, where blood darkened the fabric. "Run. It's nothing. Nothing is bleeding." "Then call it something small," he said, forcing a grin. She glared at him through tears. "You are the most impossible man alive." "Still inconvenient," he muttered, reloading. Burke's voice rose again, closer this time. "You think you can hide, Indian? I'll hang you next to your woman when this is done." Ron's eyes flicked to hers. "Stay here." "No. Hannah." I said no. Before he could stop her, she stood and fired. The shot caught Burke's head clean off his head and drove him backward with shock more than pain. "You still want to hang someone," she shouted, voice ringing clear. "Come try." Ron blinked, half laughing despite the danger. "Remind me not to argue with you. Remind me not to trust your plans," she shot back. Another volley came wild and angry. One bullet grazed her sleeve. Another splintered the log beside Ron's head. They moved fast, stepping out to draw their fire. Hannah screamed. "Ron, no." He fired once, twice, then dropped to one knee, clutching his shoulder. Blood spilled through his fingers. Tim slowed. She didn't think. She moved. Crawling through the smoke, she reached him, dragging him back as Burke charged forward. Her hand found the pistol at Ron's belt. Burke raised his gun. "That's far enough, Guido." She pulled the trigger. The shot hit him square in the chest. He staggered, eyes wide, and crumpled into the dirt. The sound of it seemed to echo forever. The other men froze, staring. One cursed, dropped his rifle, and fled. The rest followed, vanishing into the trees. For a moment, there was nothing, only the crackle of burning wood and the ragged sound of her breath. Then she turned back to Ron. "Stay with me," she said, pressing her hand over the wound. "Don't you dare leave me now." He looked up at her, pale but smiling faintly. "You shot straighter than me." "Shut up." "I mean it." "Good shot." Tears streaked her face. "You're bleeding too much." "Just resting." She tore a strip from her skirt, pressed it hard against the wound. "If you die, I'll never forgive you." He winced. "Then I'd better not." Hours later, when the smoke finally cleared, the cabin was little more than charred logs. The fire had died down, leaving black scars across the earth. Hannah sat beside Ron under the pines, his head resting against her lap. In the distance, the sheriff's riders appeared, drawn by the gunfire. Reverend McKay was with them, the old preacher who'd known her husband. He took one look at Burke's body and the spent shells, then at Hannah's tear-streaked face and Ron's wound, and nodded grimly. "Looks like justice found its own way today," he said. The sheriff frowned, but said nothing. The story would spread, of course, about the widow and the Apache who fought side by side, but for now, no one argued. When the riders left to fetch help, Hannah bent over Ron, brushing a hand across his hair. "You hear that?" she whispered. "Justice." He stirred weakly. "Don't care much for the word. I'll settle for coffee." She laughed through her tears. "You're impossible. Still inconvenient." His eyes closed, but his hand found hers, warm and steady. The fire might have burned everything else, but not that. Not the strange, fierce bond that had taken root between them in the heart of the canyon. As dusk fell, the smoke drifted upward, carrying the scent of cedar and gunpowder, and somewhere beneath it, the faint rhythm of a heartbeat that refused to stop. Ron Naya did not die, though he gave the angels a fair chase for 2 days. The town doctor in Canyon Verde said the knife had missed the artery by an inch. "A stubborn Apache heart," he muttered, shaking his head. "Refuses to quit." Hannah sat through every hour of his fever. She bathed his face, whispered nonsense to keep him tethered to the world. And when he finally opened his eyes, he found her half asleep in a chair beside his bed, her head resting on her arms. His voice was a low rasp. "You still here?" She stared, blinking, then laughed softly, the first sound of relief after too many sleepless nights. Don't sound so surprised. Someone had to keep you from wandering off again. I smiled weakly. Could have sent the sheriff. I did. He sent me back. Smart man. The fever broke the next morning. By then, the talk in town had already twisted into legend, the widow Reeves and the Apache scout who'd fought off Burke and his men with fire and grit. Most folks didn't know what to make of them, but even gossip in the West had its limits. They seen the smoke. They heard the gunfire. And they respected survival when they saw it. Judge Boone, a man with a scar across his jaw from some long-ago war, ruled the matter simple. Burke's death was self-defense. His men can count themselves lucky they ran. Then he added, with a knowing glance toward Hannah, you'd be wise to start fresh somewhere. Folks remember what they want to, not what's true. So when Ron was strong enough to stand again, they did just that. They went north, following the river through the high country, past aspen groves that shimmered like coins in the wind. By early fall, they found a stretch of land where the soil was rich and the water ran clear. Hannah stopped her horse on a rise overlooking the valley. There, she said. That's the spot. Ron looked out over the land. You sure? No, she admitted. But I'm tired of running. Might as well be sure of something. I nodded. Then we'll build here. But the cabin rose slow and steady, log by log, board by board. He cut and planed, and she nailed and measured. The rhythm of their work easy and companionable. There was bickering, though, plenty of it. She wanted the porch facing the sunrise. I wanted it facing the water. You just want to watch your reflection, she teased. Es mirkit. Maybe. But you're prettier when the sun hits your hair from the west. She rolled her eyes. That's not fair. You can't use charm to win an argument. I'm Apache. I said solemnly. It's a sacred right. She laughed so hard she nearly dropped the hammer. By the time the first frost came, the roof was on. The fire burned warm in the hearth. And the porch faced both the water and the sunrise, a compromise born of mutual stubbornness. Winter settled over Canyon Verde in soft gray silence. A snow blanketed the pines and the river froze along its edges. Ron hunted elk, Hannah tended to the horses, and together they discovered the strange comfortable rhythm of a shared life. Some nights he would drum by the fire slow, heartbeat steady, while she mended clothes or read aloud from an old book she'd carried since Kansas. He didn't understand every word, but he liked the sound of her voice. It reminded him of wind over grass, something soft but impossible to tame. One night, as she finished a chapter, she looked up and found him watching her. What? She said. Nothing. Then stopped staring. Can't. Is it? Still deciding if you're real. She felt her face grow warm. I bruise easy enough to be real. It grinned. So do dreams. The way he said it, quiet, almost reverent, made her heart flutter like a startled bird. She reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. You think this is a dream, Ron Neji? Feels like one. I murmured. But if it is, I'm not waking up. She squeezed his hand. Good. I'd be mad if you did. Spring came early that year. The snow melted fast, swelling the river until it hummed with life again. Hannah planted a garden. Ron built a small corral for her horses. He named one Ghost, a pale gray mare with a temper as fierce as Hannah's. She likes no one but you. Hannah said one morning, brushing the horse's mane. Ron gave a crooked smile. I know another like that. She swatted him with the brush. Jure impossible. Still inconvenient. I said automatically. She laughed, shaking her head. You've been saying that since the first day. And it's still true. That night they ate supper on the porch, watching the sunset over the ridge. The river murmured below, and somewhere a coyote called a single echoing yip that made them both pause. Your friend's back. She said wryly. Ron nodded. He always was persistent. I think he approves of our home. Then we'll take that as a blessing. Only a few weeks later, a letter arrived from the judge. The sheriff had finally closed the case, clearing both their names. Inside the envelope was also a small deed, the land they'd chosen, signed over in both their names. Hannah read it twice, her hands trembling. "What does it mean?" she asked. "It means," Ron said slowly, "you're not a guest anymore. You're home." She looked up at him, tears stinging her eyes. "We're home." He nodded. They nodded with a sly grin. "Does that mean I can use your good plates now?" She laughed, swatting his arm. "Maybe when you learn not to shoot holes in them. If igne the fence. That was one time. It was the only plate I liked." He smiled, watching her laughter dissolve into something softer, quieter. Then without ceremony, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small silver ring. It wasn't fancy, just a thin band shaped from a melted bullet casing. "I don't have much," he said. "And I've got no preacher's words. But I've got this." She stared, heart thudding. "Run." He took her hand gently. "I don't know what happens after this. Maybe the river floods again. Maybe the world burns. But if you'll stay, I'll build it back every time." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she was smiling that rare radiant smile that made him forget every scar he'd ever carried. "I already stayed," she whispered. "Now I'll keep doing it." He slipped the ring onto her finger, rough hands trembling a little. She laughed softly. "You didn't even ask. I was afraid you'd say no." "I might have," she teased. "Just to see your face. You'd be cruel enough," he said, grinning. She leaned up, kissed him slow, deliberate, the kind of kiss that didn't promise forever, but promised tomorrow. When they finally pulled apart, the sun had vanished and the world was wrapped in that deep blue hour between light and dark. He rested his forehead against hers. "You smell like horses," he said. "You smell like smoke. Then we're even." That night, lying beside him, Hannah listened to the wind in the pines and the steady rhythm of Ron's breathing. She thought of all the roads that had led her here, the fear, the fire, the laughter by the stream. Life had burned her down to the roots, but somehow, against all odds, new shoots had found a way through the ash. Ron stirred beside her, half asleep. "You awake?" "Yes," he mumbled. "Don't run off again." She smiled in the dark. "Not unless the coyotes steal my clothes." He chuckled, already drifting back into dreams. "Then I'll chase them off myself." "Deal," she whispered. Outside the river kept on running, not wild now, but steady and sure. The stars scattered above like silver dust, and the coyote's cry echoed once more, softer this time, like laughter shared between old friends. For the first time in either of their lives, the night held no ghosts, only the warmth of a small cabin, the beat of two hearts in rhythm, and the quiet promise of home. Thank you for staying with Ron and Hannah through every mile of dust, fire, laughter, and love. Their journey wasn't just about survival. It was about finding peace in a world that often forgets how to forgive. If this story touched your heart even a little, I hope you'll take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who loves a good Western tale, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one.